we live in a world of incrementalism. So, for example, there's several libertarians that will always comment on my stuff when I post, and I'm talking about transportation in Miami. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, the state shouldn't be doing that, or the county shouldn't be doing that. No, I get that. And I would maybe agree, but we do have these services, we do offer them, and we do tax people for them. So we might as well have them working the way they should be working, rather than this ideal situation of, well, a private company is going to come in and take over. Maybe we can work up to that. But at the start, I'd like to see an improvement. So I'm a anarcho, whatever you want to call it, mm-hmm. but I also live in reality. And as I said, I'm an entrepreneur first and foremost. So that business brain takes over, and it's like, well, that's the goal. This is what we're working with. How do we get from here to there?
Okay, so this is going to be the second time that I record this like a clown. So there's two things that I've screwed up. I ran out of coffee for guest Martha Bueno, who I will reintroduce. And also I didn't record the first time I did this introduction. You are listening to the first recording of the Liberated Podcast. I am Nick Jiménez. I am typically the voice of God figure with 8th grade basketball MVP and alleged chef Michael Beltran on Bang Gong Podcast. We also do the Dade blind tasting video series that sometimes you hear people make reference to me when I'm off camera. Today, though, we are starting recording on the Liberated Podcast, which is a thing that I created to sort of get my libertarian rocks off. This is something that I made up on the fly the first time, and now it sounds like I scripted the whole thing. It's just, that's what I said the first time, and now I'm saying it again. I am with guest Martha Bueno. This is probably not the order in which these things happen. I'm sure we can get into detail, but things that she has done in the past. You've been vice chair of the Miami-Dade Libertarian Party. You're a cannabis activist. I think you're still a cannabis activist. You ran Hispanic outreach for Joe Jorgensen's 2020 LP presidential campaign. And you are currently running, I don't know how official it is. You are currently running, you will be running.
I'm currently running.
For a Miami-Dade County Commission seat in District 10. You're running NPA.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Which is a thing that I'm sure we'll get into a little bit. And then another thing that I want to get into, but I don't know how much of an official list. I know how engaged you are in the Cuba thing, but I don't know whether, there's something that you could say as formally as some of those other things in terms of your involvement in the Cuba issue. That I'm not sure of.
I don't think there's a formal title for what I do.
Yeah,
just
sure.
Care. Well,
right.
I mean, I do. I started up a sort of organization sending medicine to Cuba.
Okay, cool. And that's
People
for Cuba.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so you're the founder of People for Cuba.
Sure.
Look at that. That's as formal as any of these other things. Look at all the shit you're doing.
Try.
Yeah. I want to start, in spite of my having introduced to you in that sort of a semi-formal way, how would you, just for the person who doesn't know you, who hasn't seen you doing public things, because I think it's probably fair to say that outside of libertarian nerd circles, you're not a household name
yet.
Right, exactly. How would you introduce yourself to somebody at a dinner party? Who is this person?
Wow, that's a big question right there. Generally, I introduce myself as a mother of four. I introduce myself. I used to say that I was a libertarian. As you said, now an MPA. I'm an entrepreneur first and foremost. It's what I've done and what I continue to do. Mm-hmm. And then I think I'm an activist more than anything else. And that's running for commission as part of that activism.
Okay. Talk a little bit about, and when we were setting up this interview, we said that we'd get into this. You're the first person I'm recording with, and I think it's, fitting that this is going to be the most overtly libertarian, lowercase and uppercase, even though you left the party, conversation that we'll have, at least in the first few. Tell me about your libertarian conversion story.
Oh, wow. So my libertarian conversion story, I think, was just discovering that libertarians existed. So I thought I was a Republican because, Cuban and Pretty much every Cuban I know is
That's
like,
just
I'm a
what you do.
Republican. Yeah, you don't even think about it. My parents were Republicans, and they're like, you're a Republican. So I believed I was. I voted for George W. Bush in 2000. And then I had a child, and we also had 9/11 happen, and just, you start paying attention more to the news, I feel like, once you have a kid. Maybe it was just me. And I couldn't make sense of why we were going to war, what that had to do with 9/11. Like, it was just a lot of confusing stuff. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized I probably wasn't a Republican. And then my uncle came over one day and he's like, you might be a libertarian. It's like, what is that? Is he insulting me? Like, what is this
What'd
thing?
you call me?
Yeah, like, what?
So,
Excuse me?
y tu mamá, por si acaso.
And so I looked it up. And I was like, oh, you mean there's another political group out there that doesn't believe in war? I mean, they obviously believe in the concept of war, and they believe in defending our shores, but just not going to war just because. They believe in freedom and equality, and equal outcomes is one of those things that I find very odd. That, I feel like in government nowadays, we're looking for equal outcomes, and we're never going to have equal outcomes. I'm never going to be your height. I'm just never going to be able to reach the top shelves. Like, we're never going to be able to have that equality in that sense. Yeah. And so it's weird to me that we're pushing for that now. But libertarians believe in equality of opportunities. Everybody should have access to, at least in terms of government, the same. We shouldn't be asking for special favors, and I agreed with that.
For the sake of knowing, but also having some context moving forward in all the rest of what we're talking about, what, for lack of a more technical term, what flavor of libertarianism do you find yourself falling into?
Wow. That's a difficult one, because honestly, for my own views, I'm more of an anarchist and a anarcho-capitalist, maybe. But I don't think the world kind of operates that way. So I am not the libertarian that'll tell you, the world should operate this way. I believe in reality, and we live in reality. Sure. So while that would be my ideal, I think that we live in a world of incrementalism. So, for example, there's several libertarians that will always comment on my stuff when I post, and I'm talking about transportation in Miami. And it's like, well, the state shouldn't be doing that, or the county shouldn't be doing that. No, I get that. And I would maybe agree, but we do have these services, we do offer them, and we do tax people for them. So we might as well have them working the way they should be working, rather than this ideal situation of, well, a private company is going to come in and take over. Maybe we can work up to that. But at the start, I'd like to see an improvement. So I'm an anarcho, whatever you want to call it, but I also live in reality. And as I said, I'm an entrepreneur first and foremost. So that business brain takes over, and it's like, well, that's the goal. This is what we're working with. How do we get from here to there? I
share a lot of that view with you. I have been very comfortably describing myself as an anarcho-capitalist for a while. And I think part of the issue there, right, is that whether people assign this to themselves with a sort of a weird pride, or people like mistakenly attribute to that idea this thing, like they imagine that it's like, oh, it's just people burning shit, breaking windows. Like they hear anarcho anything, and that's where their heads go. But I get it, right? Like you do live inside of a reality. I guess for me, what that reality has meant, and when I say what it's meant, it's more like what my ideals are, what I might advocate for, because I haven't been in a position to make any of these changes. I'm not in government. Right. Well, but you're trying to be. Yeah. I guess I would take sort of like an incrementalist approach, right? Where to the extent that I was trying to make changes in some of those systems, it would still be at least moving the needle in making them smaller and in privatizing them, right? Rather than just treat it as like burn it down or nothing. Right. Is that where you land, or do
That's
you, or
where
do
I
you,
land.
or do you? So what does, since you brought up transportation, what does that kind of incrementalism moving in the direction of getting the state out of it look like? At least like in the first, like let's suppose in the first year.
Right. So the first year, there's no getting the state or the county out of it.
Right. But what steps are taken in that direction?
What would step one be? First step, I think, is to analyze the whole system from top to bottom with experts and bring in the numbers, because there really isn't. Every time I look at a public bus, for example, transiting in Miami, it's empty.
Right.
It's empty. And there you can't find any, at least not publicly available through the county websites or anything. You can't find like the loads, like what's the time frames? Have we done these studies? Do we have that availability? And so I am working with Bob Poole from Reason Magazine. He has very kindly offered to help with my campaign, especially in the transportation stuff, to help me identify the issues with the transportation system, and then how we can improve it doing these type of things. And the first step, again, is analyzing the whole system and seeing where we can make improvements and using what has worked in other cities to then improve. So the last mile is a big issue for people here in Miami. You can take a bus, and then it'll drop you off like a mile from your house. How do you bridge that last gap? How do we make transportation really effective to work for the people that need to take it? And that's, I don't have the answer just yet, but we are working on it. It's something that as I said, he's very generous in helping me with this task and bringing in the professionals to help me really go down into what the problems are, because we can talk about it all day, but if you don't ride the bus, regularly, if you aren't part of that, how do you really know? Right. And our commissioners, I don't think they've ever ridden the bus. So how are they making these decisions for us? Yeah,
I guess what I'm wondering is, and just kind of sticking with that hypothetical, and of course, like if the first step is to do these studies, then we don't know what exactly we're talking about in this hypothetical.
Right.
But in a very general sense, what's your position as a libertarian on when you're confronted with the political realities, right? That maybe that last mile, the solutions that are within reach politically are not necessarily libertarian solutions. The solutions may be ones that grow the role of the government in transit.
I mean, again, we have to get to that hypothetical, but
it is the likely hypothetical because there aren't a bunch of other libertarians on the county commission.
Well, so let's look at apps like Uber and Lyft and stuff. I mean, they already in certain cities work with the government to provide these low-cost options. We have just decided that bus and metro rail is how we're going to get around Miami, right? We obviously don't have an ability to build an underground system. And so when you look at like our metro, like the latest one being proposed to go over the bay, I think it was over $1 billion to build. Is that the most cost-effective method? Is that the best way we can get across? And from what I'm hearing, it's not. So are these things, that were being proposed libertarian? No, they're not.
Right.
But there are ways to make it better. And like I was, just little simple ideas. There are now apps. There are now things that can make our buses or infrastructure, whatever, more efficient.
Right.
So that from what I'm hearing, you have no idea when a bus comes to your stop or if it's running late or we can do these things that other cities have. Next bus arrives in X number of minutes. We don't have any of that infrastructure. That's pretty simple with today's technology. Why aren't we there yet? So those little changes that make the experience better for people need to start being added and then see, kind of take it step by step. I don't want to promise a big change when what I'm really saying is we need to take it step by step.
And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Like, I'm not suggesting like, what's your plan for shifting to zero buses on the streets of Miami-Dade County, but more, how do you reconcile those political realities with that desire to shrink because you'll be on a commission of people who, by and large, are, and you'll also be incentivized, but you have this philosophical thing fighting the incentives. But people who are not only incentivized, but who have convinced themselves probably and others that actually the virtue is in growing the state, that's the first solution. And so
sounds like I have a big task ahead of me.
I don't think I'm saying anything particularly insightful. I mean, we're talking about government and the people in it, and then weirdos like us are the ones who are like, no, everybody, you should be working against yourselves. Like, which is ultimately what you're talking about.
I am. I would hope that, I would get myself out of a job. If I do a good enough job, I may be able to remove the job altogether. Right. And that is the ultimate goal, is how do we shrink government? And so with that transportation, last thing on it, it's just a matter of making it effective, because we are taxing people so much for it. So not only is it coming out of our property taxes, but we have the half a penny sales tax that in the last 20 years has collected over $3 billion. And we've not used it and wasted it on paving roads. How has that, they taxed us for the specific thing to improve our transportation, and then they haven't done the job. So it's not like the money isn't there. Yeah. It's not like that money isn't being collected either. We just refund it to everyone and say, hey, we messed up. Here's your money back, which is almost impossible because it came from sales taxes. Or we actually fixed the thing. Yeah. I don't really see a middle ground there. Yeah.
So in conversations that you have with people, especially ones who didn't know you before this, I imagine by now you've already spoken to a lot of voters in that district that you're running in and all the rest. The way that you talk about it, right? Even though I'm kind of pushing you into this more nerdy libertarian thing where you're like, it's my fault if you're like two steps from like, sounding like you're Adam Kokesh over here, the peaceful dissolution of the entire Miami-Dade County or something, which is fine, right? If I was in your district, I'd vote for it.
I'm not there yet. I don't think we're anywhere near the dissolution.
I'm saying it like very tongue in cheek, right? But the way that you talk about it is in a way that I think probably it would not be a total turnoff. You're not what a lot of people might react to as like, oh, you're crazy. Yeah, exactly.
The crazy libertarian lady.
Exactly, right. Yeah.
I mean, I could be that way.
Sure, right. But what and granted, you're not running with the LP, but when you then describe yourself as a libertarian or people learn about your history with the LP, what's the reaction been at that point? Like when people start to discover like, oh, this person is coming to us from this perspective with a name that I have always associated with a fringe.
Right. So I think that that's part of the reason why I'm no longer a libertarian, is that association. I think that most of us, especially Cubans, it's come to more and more of a realization. We all tend to be very libertarian. Mm-hmm. We tend to really, really believe in this thing called freedom. And so that name, that title, that libertarian takes away from, what you're saying to people. This thing that I believe in is called freedom. Whatever the political party that embodies it is fine. But this concept is what I will always be fighting for, whatever you want to call it. So does paying more and more in property taxes every year, does that give you more freedom or does it take away your freedom? Well, in my view, it takes away my freedom, because in my case, I pay $10,000 a year to live in the house that I live in. Mm-hmm. It didn't start off that way. I used to pay just over $5,000, and every so many years it's just increased and increased and increased, and that's not freedom. That's taking away my right to be able to use that money for something else. And I think that that's something that people agree with. So it's not that I lead with being a libertarian. People find out, they can look me up, they can see it, but it's just not a concept that I am promoting or I ever promoted. Even as the vice chair, it was always about how can we be more free? How can we promote more freedom? Right,
yeah, and that's what I meant, right? Because I can see that you're not leading with being libertarian. What I mean is more when people learn that about you, does it change their perception of the idea?
No, not really.
Yeah.
Which I thought was funny, because I thought people would be like, oh, this crazy libertarian. But usually it's like, people are like, tú eres libertaria, no?
Yeah.
After I say things for a while, it's like, okay, that's where it comes into. But I'm not that, like you mentioned, Adam Kokesh. People know him because he's like a staunch activist who like does the like really out there things.
Right.
I'm not really out there.
Yeah, you're not loading a shotgun in front of Francis Suarez's office.
Exactly. Exactly. No, and I don't think I ever would be. Francis has nothing to worry about.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned Cubans tending to be libertarian, whether they're calling themselves that or not. But the Cubans being libertarians was a big part of my conversion story.
Really? Do tell.
So usually I'll point to my time living in Madison, Wisconsin, and my involvement in a group that you might be familiar with called Raíces de Esperanza.
No, I'm actually not.
So I was on the board of the group between 08 and 09, or no, mentira, from until 2010, starting in about 2007. And we were a youth organization, a lot of college students and young professionals. And the idea was to do like youth empowerment and democracy promotion in Cuba. So I went to Cuba 4 times, if you include the time that I was kicked out and blacklisted between 08 and 09. And I haven't been able to go back since. But one of the conversations, it was conversations in Wisconsin, which is like the cradle of American ultra-lefty progressivism. And then conversations in Cuba. And one of the conversations in Cuba that I remember like really led to my challenging internally ideas that I had, because I think at the time I was, probably calling myself a conservative. And it was just sort of like not reflexive, but just like that's just what you do. Like, yeah, I grew up in that, and it makes kind of makes sense. I was in Havana talking with Claudia Cadelo, who is a blogger. She was like kind of I don't know if protege is the right word, but she like a good friend and like student of Yoani Sanchez's, and her then boyfriend Ciro Rodriguez, who was a member. He was the bassist in Bueno para Ricardo. So they were like a big punk rock group, underground punk rock group in Cuba. If you've
name like that, I could only imagine.
Which actually the name itself is a super libertarian name.
Right.
You hear them explain it like the logo of the group is it's a hammer that the handle looks like a penis and it's going through a vagina sickle. But their explanation of the whole thing is that Porno para Ricardo represents the antithesis of Cuban communism, because Cuban communism is all about rejecting, is all about this collectivism and this idea of the new man and rejecting these individualist vices and whatever. And so it's porn, which is an automatic rejection, and it's not for everyone. It's for this one guy we made up named Ricardo. And that's what we're about. We're about like, fuck you, here's some porn, and also it's just for this one dude.
I love it. Very libertarian.
Yeah. So I was with them and Orlando Luis Pardolazo, who's a poet and a dissident writer. Unfortunately, none of these people live in Cuba anymore, which is one of the sad realities of the whole thing. But we were talking about paladares and casas particulares and the fees and the taxes that they're charged. And I was, not up in arms, right? I mean, you're in Cuba. How upset can you be? You're going to spend the entire trip in Cuba, screaming
just
about
angry.
it. Yeah. But we were having that conversation, and one of them raised the point, not defending those things, but really sort of like pushing me. At the time, I was probably 21. And he said, "Well, what do you get taxed on a business in the U.S.? Or what are your tax rates?" And I was like, "Oh shit! Like, where? Like, is this? Am I really trying to like? Is my position really that like?" It really is just how deep is a pan before it becomes a pot.
Yeah. Like
if it's immoral at 25, it's immoral at 1, it's immoral at 50.
Exactly.
Right. So
that's a point that I make to people often.
Right.
It's like, well, if slavery was them taking your
right.
salary at 100%, at what percent is it not
right.
slavery?
Well, I just had that conversation where I brought up, and I always throw in the caveats of like, there's a very like cliche libertarian thing, but
obviously we don't mean it like that. Please don't come after me because I compared taxation to slavery.
Right.
It's a question, right? It's a pondering.
Well, and then there's also I typically use the slavery example as a response to when people bring up the, either directly or something along the lines of who will build the roads. And I say, at the time there was a debate of who will pick the cotton. And the correct answer was not, well, the free market will lead to the development of cotton gins and industrialized agriculture. No, the answer is you just don't fucking do it.
Yeah.
You just don't do the slavery. You don't do the thing. There's coffee.
There is coffee. Not Cuban coffee though.
This is actually perfect for anybody who watches or listens to or reads anything I do. That I would have. Thank you so much. That the guest on the first episode of this podcast would actually be the one to solve my coffee problem.
Thank you.
My assistant didn't do shit to solve the coffee problem. He's useless.
See, my assistant is way better.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, my assistant does solve the coffee problem.
Yeah. The thing is, I keep putting up job listings for assistants who will let me cuddle with them in my bed, and nobody's willing to take that job from him. So, I'm stuck with this loser.
What were we saying?
So anyway, so that was
coffee interruption.
That was at least a component of my whole libertarian conversion thing, and it was talking with Cubans in Cuba who, they might have even called themselves libertarians. I don't know if we got into that, but who were certainly thinking more along those lines and who were approaching it from this very philosophical perspective, even though they were in the belly of the beast with all kinds of other material concerns to think about.
Well, I mean, it's terrible to compare the United States and Cuba because it is so absolutely terrible what is happening there.
Right.
In this, but at the same time, that has happened to me when I talk to my family members and they're like, okay, that happens in America too. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh my God, how could that happen? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, that does happen here. A lot of these things do happen here.
It's all right.
I'm like, child?
It's okay. It really is. It's not a big deal.
Child?
I'm amazed that nothing of mine has gone off and started,
Yeah, what I'm trying to think of specific examples of this exact conversation. I just can't think of any right now. Yeah. But, it's a lot of, oh shit, we have that too.
Yeah.
It's not that different when you really get down to it. Sure, we're not allowed to, for example, or we are allowed to fish, pretty much off of any bridge. But we do need a permit to do that. Mm-hmm. And then, if you want to build in your home, you need the government's permission.
Right.
We can only have homes that the government sanctions.
Right.
Like if you want to live in something different, and I'm not saying tents or whatever, although you should be able to if you wanted to.
Right.
But I'm talking about even hempcrete. I've been seeing people that are 3D printing homes in other states, and there seems to be really good solutions to people who need affordable housing. And it's no, you can only build these things that we have decided are the appropriate structures.
Yeah.
And I wonder why. In my own house, I wanted to build another unit. I have a in-law quarter. Mm-hmm. And I also happen to be the responsible person for many elderly or soon to be elderly and will need. Okay. So I needed a second unit. And I contracted with
is soon to be just so that they don't hear you on the record calling them elderly.
Well, they don't really need. Well, yes,
covering your ass a little.
Both of my parents are in their late 70s.
Okay, yeah,
they're fine on their own for now. My mom lives in my home with me, but she's amazing and doesn't need assistance. But how long is that going to last, right? And I want to have them close. And I wanted to build a second unit. My parents are no longer together. We don't need them, in the same place, killing themselves before it's their time to pass. And it turns out that even though I live on a rather large property and I have the space and I am self-sufficient mostly, I have my own water system, I can't build another structure on my property because you're only allowed to have 2 in Miami-Dade with bathrooms. Mm-hmm. So either I build a shed with no bathroom for my father or I don't build anything at all. And now I'm left with no solution. And what is the solution? Well, I can go ask for a variance I actually sit on the board that grants these variances. Okay. So I would, of course, recuse myself if I ever did that.
Sure.
But that's a $5,000 ordeal just to get in front of the of my board because of the county. So, I mean, just before they even possibly grant me the possibility of building something, I'm out $5,000. And this is just insane to me. And then we're sitting here saying, why don't we have affordable housing? Well, a lot of our laws don't exactly make it a possibility. And yes, I know my situation is different, yada, yada, but you can, the first libertarian act I ever did was trying to help Shawnee Chaser. She's a Miami resident who is known for the treehouse lady. Okay. She wanted to live in her treehouse in front of her home. It's a perfectly fine structure. It's just not your traditional home. And she wasn't able to either. So, I mean, there's a lot of these things, people that just don't want to live for whatever reason the way everybody else does, and we're being banned from it. And how is that any different than what happens in Cuba? If the government doesn't allow them to do it, they can't do it.
It's a matter of degrees, right? I mean, I think that's the thing that I always typically try to make sure that I've established in those conversations, because I do think that there's a way to make those comparisons that at the very least just rhetorically is kind of gross, and then depending on where it's coming from and what that person's meaning is, because some people might actually be pretending, or deluding themselves into thinking that this is actually like Cuba. The example that comes to mind is Billy Corbin. So I don't know what your Billy Corbin thoughts are, but we had him on Pancon Podcast, and I stepped in at one point, and basically told him, like, there's a lot of people that think you're full of shit, and they're right, because you're, how long we've been sitting here on this podcast, like, I have a lot of the same problems that you have with your Joe Carollos and your so-and-so, all these characters. That is not the same as, like, being Fidel Castro. And he went as far as to say, like, well, the issue is that the Cubans wouldn't know what to do with democracy if they had it. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Like,
that's insulting.
Right, exactly, right. And it's like, and yeah.
So what, Cubans don't know about democracy because they're stuck in a...
No, they know about it. They wouldn't know what to do with it if they had it.
Right.
And his argument is that Miami is the evidence, that we've had it for 60 years here, and we're still electing Joe Carollo, which is basically electing Raul Castro. So we can't be that was effectively the argument there. Right. Which is
I don't want to defend Carollo. Like, I feel like I'm put in a position.
Isn't that the worst part of it? That you feel like you're defending Joe Carollo?
I don't want to defend Joe Carollo because I agree. How the heck have we continuously... we elect the same people. It's, whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether you agree with them, whether you don't. We should be having these debates. We shouldn't be hiding from them. But he's not a Raul Castro. He's not even a Fidel. Like, he's just...
Yeah, he was throwing that around. He was talking about Catherine Fernandez-Rundle and Joe Carollo. I was like, yeah,
there's a lot of corruption.
All kinds of issues. And then it's also like, what city are we talking about as the alternative? Like, it's a big city government. There's corruption... Where are we? What are we looking to as the model? L.A., New York, Chicago? Like,
compared to all the other big cities in the United States, like big cities.
Yeah.
Because Miami is the 7th largest county in the United States. We are a huge city, county, whatever you want to call it. Compared to all the other ones that you just named, I think we're doing really well.
Not only that, but honestly, like, I think if there is something that makes Miami unique, Miami corruption unique, it's that it's more fun. It's such a colorful corruption of weirdos. Like, that's what really sets us apart. And
Chicago does have some characters. New York. The thing is, our corruption isn't like they haven't killed people the way Cuomo did. They also didn't molest people. I don't want to say something that'll get me in trouble, but Biden's daughter says that her father molested her. We have Cuomo, who was ew.
Yeah.
Our guys are batshit, but at least they're not,
There's some comedy in there.
Yeah. I can laugh at their stuff.
Right.
I can't laugh at the Cuomo, Biden stuff. Like, that's just horrible.
Right.
How do they get this far?
Yeah.
In life, and nobody calls them out beforehand. So, there's degrees.
Yeah. So before we move on to, because I would really like to talk about the bigger, and I'm sure there may very well be connections to your ideas for a county commission job. But before we get to cannabis and Cuba, I'd like I'd like to kind of round out the county commission thing. Mm-hmm. Talk a bit about, and again, especially for the benefit of people who, I guess for both, right? For people who are here and maybe don't know all this, but for people who aren't here, because different places in the country, county means a different thing, or their purview is different. So what would you actually be dealing with in a county commission role? And at least the last time we spoke, you didn't quite have a final platform, but you have some sense of maybe a handful of issues that you imagine wanting to make the focus of your time there. Yeah.
So first and foremost, what does a county commission do, right? And I think that's the question that I get asked the most is, okay, what do they do?
Yeah.
So county commission is basically the people that decide the financials for the county. It's the budget, how much, the taxes are going or where they're going to go, that type of thing. They control over a $9 billion budget. They can also decide if we're going to issue bonds. I mean, it's a very financial heavy role. And so I equate this job to being the CEOs of Miami and making all of these decisions. The mayor would be the CEO at the end of the day, and then the commissioners are kind of the executives that make those decisions, and then the mayor has the ability to change it. They make all these decisions for Miami that have a real true impact. I feel like we tend to really focus on presidential candidates that don't affect our daily lives, but our commissioners do. They do have the ability to affect our daily lives. Yeah. So this is a really important role in my mind. And so things that I care about, we talked about transportation, about making it easier, more accessible, reducing the budget, reducing property taxes especially. That's a really big one for me. I lived with my grandfather when I first had a child, and that was the first time I realized that if you don't pay your property taxes, you will lose your home. Yep. The government will take it. And so there's a large segment of our population who can no longer afford their property taxes. And they're looking at homelessness. And it's usually people on a fixed income, i.e. those that are disabled or elderly. And yet, during COVID, our commission decided to raise our property taxes. For what? I mean, it drives me crazy. And we point to something that has changed, that we can say, hey, there is now a need for more property taxes because we installed this program and it needs money. Right. There's nothing. No. We can't point to anything. It's just like, oh, well, inflation affects us all. But where is that money going? Like, just because inflation is affecting you doesn't mean you can just take more from us. And it does. It does mean that. At the end of the day, they decide it, and that's it. We either fall in line or lose your property. Those are your options. Right. So those are the type of things, really the big ticket items that I feel very passionate about. And then there's the smaller, pet projects that everybody has. I really don't think our commissioners are necessarily the best people to be making these long-term decisions for Miami without input, and they don't want input from us. We used to have 2 minutes to speak on any issue at the commission, and they moved it down to a minute. So how is it possible when you have to stand up there and you say your full name and your address? There goes the minute. How do you get your ideas across to these people if they don't even want to hear from you? So these are the type of things I want people to be able to come and explain and talk and offer solutions, and be able to really work on these things instead of just being like, well, so-and-so gave me a donation, so we're doing whatever so-and-so says. Because at the end of the day, that's who writes most of the proposals put through, you know. So it's just a matter of at least bringing attention to the real issues we have instead of sweeping them under the rug. Right.
How much of your motivation in general is not just making certain kinds of change, but also advancing libertarian ideas? And I'm saying libertarian ideas just to give it a name, but those ideas of how do you
I think they go together.
Sure, but in other words, how deliberate would you be about it? Like, when you're doing this and people are asking you, like, if you saw that you had made these changes and the changes were popular, but it hadn't quite registered in people's minds that, like, if you weren't shifting the lens through which people were viewing everything, would you see that as a goal not met, or is that not really something that you're after?
Not really something I'm after. Again, I see things as like, as long as you're proving freedom, as long as you're working towards that goal, I think it'll come, you'll scream it from the rooftops. I mean, if all of a sudden you're able to explore all the options on the table and not just the ones that are paying you to explore, isn't that a win? I remember distinctly, because it just happened not too long ago, when we started having Uber and Lyft. What did we have before that? Right. We had taxis, and taxis had the taxi medallions, which they could buy from, the county, the state, whatever, for large sums of money. So the county themselves cut down on the ability of Uber and Lyft and whatever these apps that were coming in to work, because of course they had a monopoly on the licenses so their goals and motivation are not the same goals and motivation that we, the general public, And I will always consider myself the general public, because even if I get in the seat, I don't intend to stay there very long. I've never been a politician, and this isn't something that I want long term. I'd like to serve 4 years and bye. Yeah. But so I have to live here. I want to live here. This is my city. My goal is to leave it better than I found it. And I think that that'll show up once things start working and improving. I hope that people see, going back to that Uber and Lyft example, our cases of drunk driving are down. It has improved, our accidents, our rates of accidents. It has done so much good just by allowing the free market to actually work.
Right.
Imagine if we wouldn't have fought it. Imagine if there was more than 2 companies providing this service. Imagine, again, so many things. Our buses, yes, they're run by Miami-Dade County currently. But are there better options? Is there a company out there that's doing this, that can do a better job more efficiently with better? Probably. It's a shame that we'll never explore those things.
Right. Part of why I asked about whether or how changing minds in that sort of broad sense plays a role was your having left the LP. And I recently listened to a podcast that you did, and I don't want to get into all the things that we're talking about, because you made it very clear you didn't want to talk about certain things anymore.
No, we can totally talk about anything.
And honestly, I really only kind of poke my head into those conversations every once in a while, because I'm not so enveloped in all of the LP politics stuff. Like,
thank God, neither am I anymore.
Well, so I'm not, because I don't have any political aspirations, and I don't really have much interest in parties' communications. Yeah. But every time that I'm exposed to it, it just feels so silly. Like, the LP is especially a clown show, and I wish that it weren't.
I recently came under the discovery that the LP is like a Silicon Valley company. They have this sum of money, and by golly, they're going to spend it trying to grow this operation. And they are doing it from the top down. So you have all these people that just want to get these positions of power that mean nothing. Instead of growing an organization from the ground up, like how I have built my companies, you can't just start a movement from the top and be like, I don't know why people aren't following along. We've been at this for 50 years, the LP. For 50 years, how have you not been able to sell freedom? Freedom sells itself. As soon as people are given this notion, they're like, wow, I love freedom. How can you mess up freedom?
Right. Well, and it goes to, the slightly cheesy tagline of this podcast is, conversations about how we understand, secure, and exercise freedom. I think this speaks to the securing them, and where I think that the LP has, again, in my limited exposure, has failed, is that it makes sense for a party to be concerned with its own growth, right? In the same way that it makes sense for any business to be concerned with its own growth. But for some reason that I'm not engulfed in it enough to understand, the LP hasn't really grasped what you seem to. And I don't really have strong feelings about whether you should or shouldn't have left the LP. I could see why people would think when people get it, they should stick around. But I have no
aspirations to ever grow the LP, because the problem is that doesn't change anything.
Well, what I was driving at though was that what it doesn't seem to have understood is that the way you grow the LP is by selling people on ideas and getting them wins. But the LP's message and the message of many LP campaigns at different levels seems from in my experience to have been to sell people on the idea of growing the LP. But if you're a voter, you don't give a shit about the LP's, the voter access goals. You want to know what the LP is doing for you. Exactly. And then that will get you to vote LP more often.
And then the more people vote for you, the bigger your pool of growth. Exactly my point. You want to start from the smallest and build your way up. So how I would envision that here in Miami, I hope people see that I'm running for this seat, that I share their values, that I'm willing to put in the work to get these things done, and that I'm not going to go and accept, these big checks from people that expect me to then fulfill the unofficial promise of when they give it to you. You
Right.
know, so if you see that and you're like, oh, I can get behind this, well then come join the Liberty Movement, which is basically this idea that I want to keep fostering. I can do it without being part of the Libertarian
Right.
Party because I don't agree with that message. And I was part of it for 4 years, you know, and I realized, why don't people that come to these meetings want to do the things that I think would grow the party?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not focused on that.
But your disagreement is more of a tactical one than a philosophical one.
Right. I'm through and through a libertarian in terms of what I believe. You can look up their platform, and it's, you know, equality. Again, like the individual is the smallest minority.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't have these laws based on, you know, if you're Hispanic or if you're this or everybody should be equal. And the reason we came to this point is because over the years we've created these groups. So now you need to undo those groups by creating new laws. Let's just take it all the way back. Mm-hmm. Every man and woman and everyone was created equal. Everyone should have, like, our banking laws are like, if you're so and so, you don't get access to this. Why?
Right.
I mean, those are the type of things that I think libertarians believe in. But then when we talk about it, we turn into like, oh my God, you're not libertarian enough because you don't believe what I believe. Oh my God. So I think that general idea that we are, you know, all equal and the law should apply equally, whether you're a police officer or the citizen, you know, law should apply equally. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter that you're special and that somebody elected you to an office as a politician. If you're, you know, doing this bad thing, you too should face the consequences. Yeah. I think these are simple concepts. Yeah. And yet in this country, we don't tend to have that. We have special categories of people. We see it all the time. Drugs, you know, particularly, it's a subject that I love to talk about. We have Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son. He's a known addict. Mm-hmm. He's never spent a day in jail for his addiction. But I know plenty of people who've gone to jail for simple things. We don't have equality. How is it possible that this isn't the conversation that we're having? That we're like, well, no, that person needs to be prosecuted. Like, why? Why is the government even involved in what substances we put in our body? We need to take it back to, like, why do we even have these laws?
So here comes a super graceful interview segue. Tell me about the devil's lettuce.
Ooh, my favorite subject. No, I'm kidding. So first and foremost, I get called a stoner or pothead by people that don't understand where I'm coming from. So let me back it up and say that I had never actually tried the devil's lettuce until I was in my late 30s, already a mother of 4. And I had a medical condition in my thyroid. And I went to a doctor, a regular, everyday doctor, and they said, hey, within the next 6 months, we need you to have your thyroid removed. We're going to just remove it. And you're going to be on pills for the rest of your life. I had cysts. I had all sorts of issues with it. And so I started doing research, and I had already kind of on the fringe been involved a little bit in the cannabis movement. And I went to see a doctor that I had met, who is now my doctor and good friend, Dr. Weiner. She's here in Miami. No. Sorry, plugging her. She's wonderful, magnificent. And I went to see her and she said, well, what's the harm? Mm-hmm. Right? What's the harm of trying this? Worst case scenario, you still have your thyroid removed in 6 months. Yep. And because we're saying this publicly, I will say that there's no evidence to say that cannabis solved my problem. However, today I still have my thyroid, and every follow-up I have not had an issue that needs my thyroid to come out. As a matter of fact, the issue is almost gone, resolved, and that's it. So I came to this as a medical patient. And then I came to this as an activist when I met Giselle Delgadillo, who is a mom here in Miami-Dade County. She has a son named Bruno who has Dravet syndrome. And the gist of it is she had to risk her freedom in order to provide her son with what he needs. So Dravet syndrome is a form of epilepsy. It's very, very, very dramatic. People tend to have about 300 seizures in the worst part of it, a day. Mm-hmm. This child, as a baby, was having 300 seizures a day and went through the gamut. When I met her, she was already on the other side of this. Her son was already stable on cannabis. But before then, he was taking all of these drugs. They even prescribed veterinary off-label things because they just couldn't get him under stabilized. And somebody took her to California, to see a doctor, see her son, obviously, a doctor, and got him on cannabis. And he's now, I think he's 10, and he has maybe 1 or 2 a week if he has some sort of medical condition. Generally, it's very controlled. Yeah. So he is doing incredibly better. And yet there's politicians out there, there's people out there in government that can tell this mother, your son doesn't get to have this thing because we decided. Doesn't matter that there's this medical evidence. It doesn't matter that it's working for her son. It doesn't matter. She couldn't have it. And when I heard her story before cannabis was legalized fully here in Florida for medical reasons, I was infuriated. I'm the mother of 4. My kids are, thank God, healthy. But I couldn't imagine being put in a position where my kids need something and there is a politician or a bureaucrat or somebody that's saying, no, sorry. I know you want it and I know your kid can use it, but no me da la gana. Sorry, no cannabis for your kid, no medicine for your kid.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
It just enrages me thinking about it still. Like, how have we gotten to this point? How are we allowing, you can't practice medicine without a license, but if you're a politician, you can.
Sure.
Blows my mind.
What's the age range of your kids?
Ooh, I have a 21-year-old.
Okay.
At the end of this month, I'll have an 18-year-old.
Okay.
14 and 12.
So, so here's the reason I ask is that puts you in social circles with, I imagine, parents of kids of all those ages.
Right.
I would imagine that you, not that it would necessarily be contentious, although maybe it has been, but what's that like, right? Because not everybody who is an advocate is this open about it and this public about it. And then I wonder, what happens
being my kid
there?
Is fun. I'm just going to say being my kid is fun. I will show up to things with weed clothing. So because I am so open about it. At the beginning of COVID, I had a black mask with a glitter pot leaf on it. Yeah. And I'd go everywhere. I mean, I don't care. I will go everywhere with this type of stuff. So my kids are always like, ay, mami, que pena. Like, please don't do this to me. Please don't show up at my school with that.
If you want to really embarrass them, by the way, I don't. Are you familiar with Captain Kush?
No, I'm not.
So I have my theories.
Should I dress up like Captain Kush?
I have theories. I don't know, but I've never seen Captain Kush and Matt Kusher, who owns Kush Locale, in the same place at the same time. I don't know. But Captain Kush dresses like this.
I mean, that's a pretty good suit. Yeah. I might have to join him.
If you run into Matt Kusher, he might know where Captain Kush is.
Gotcha.
And sometimes this guy's at Stevens Deli in Hialeah, hanging out with Hialeah Spider-Man. Are you familiar with Hialeah?
No, I'm not. I need to be introduced to this guy.
So a lot of local superheroes.
Yeah. How have I missed this?
Yeah, Captain Kush and Hialeah Spider-Man, who dresses up as Spider-Man in Hialeah.
Well, Captain Kush, hit me up.
Yeah. Captain
we need
Kush
to chat.
I'm sure he would love to chat about, especially if any of your race involves that issue.
Well, see, that's the thing. I think that those who don't like cannabis, by all means, you should never touch it. And I am not a proponent of children touching it. I don't think, because that's the other thing. Is like, oh, you just want kids to do this.
Right.
No, I don't. I don't believe that we should be giving it to kids, unless, of course, in the case of Bruno, it's beneficial to them in some way. We can say no to drugs, but also not throw people in jail. And there's the other side of that. A lot of the money that we pay in taxes, 22 cents of every dollar in Miami-Dade County that we pay goes for our jail system. There are currently over 4,000 people in Miami-Dade County jails. A lot of that is for drugs. People who are addicted to things, they don't benefit from being in jail. They benefit from going to rehab. They benefit from help. Yeah. They don't benefit from this. So they're taking money from all of us to punish people for putting substances in their own body. I mean, we don't do that to people who are alcoholics. We say, oh my gosh, you have a problem. Would you like to go to Alcoholics Anonymous? Would you like help? Why do we do that to people with drug issues? Like, it's just, we have all these rules that are cruel, that don't benefit people. Yeah. And they're cruel to us, the tax-paying population, because we have to pay for these things that don't help anyone. It's a slap in the face to have to pay for these things that then don't benefit us.
And it's also, it blows my mind that that we have such a perfect analog in alcohol prohibition. and that lesson
can't
isn't
see it.
learned, right? Like it's so dumbfounding to me. Like I don't think you have to be a libertarian to grasp that treating it like alcohol would avoid all of this organized crime, all of this this.
Isn't it crazy that people can draw the parallel?
Yeah,
I talk about this all the time. It's like literally the same thing.
You don't have to think that the two things do the same thing, but in terms of the incentive structures you're creating, all this artificial demand for black markets and what have you.
And now with legalization of cannabis, we can see people are no longer shooting each other over cannabis. Now the drug deals that go bad might be heroin or harder drugs, but people aren't shooting up street corners for cannabis because now you can go to a cannabis dispensary and get your stuff. Like the more it happens, people still want to believe that no, this is so bad that we have to keep fighting against it. It's clear. And then the issues with Latin America, of course. The drug war, the United States drug war is legitimately the reason why Latin America is the way it is. And people are trying to get into the United States. So people who are like, oh no, I'm anti-immigration. Okay, so let's talk about drugs. And they're like, no, I don't want to talk about that either. At some point, we have to realize that these policies are really bad.
So here's a kind of straddling this topic and the previous one. What, if anything, can you do with a county commission seat on that issue, even if indirectly, right? Because you're like messing with budgets and then the second part of that question is, given that so much of that isn't resolved, at least the criminalization aspects of it isn't necessarily resolved there's all of the other levels of government that deal with that. And do you think that and we could replace cannabis with any number of other issues, that at this particular time when you're chasing a county commission seat, that a focus on some of this other more controversial stuff might get in the way of your being able to affect change in a county commission seat?
People that know me know that I will always be for cannabis, legalization or decriminalization or, whatever will put us to the most freedom. Same with many other drugs. What can a commissioner do? That is a great question that I don't necessarily have a straight answer for you. But my goal is to find out, and my goal is to do whatever it is to the maximum ability that I can do. If that is to direct police to not pursue cannabis, if you see somebody smoking a joint, if they're disrupting other people, that's, maybe that might be one thing. But if somebody's on a corner somewhere smoking a joint, kind of let them be.
Yeah.
That type of thing. Making sure that people have the ability to go to rehab versus jail. Making sure that these things are available, and that if county services are being used to put people in jail for these things, to be able to move it towards helping them rather than, and again, it's a big task, especially, these are the type of things that I don't like promising, because politicians tend to promise, and if I get elected, I'm going to do all of these things and give everybody a candy cane. At the end of the day, there's 13 people on that commission seat. My goal is to be very loud and very vocal about these issues so that everybody can hold their commissioner accountable and say, you know what, that doesn't make any sense. Why do we keep funding these things? Why do we keep doing them? I would like it for the other 12 commissioners that I would potentially sit with to say, you know what, Martha, you're right. Let's focus on this. Can I get that accomplished? It depends on who the commissioners are sitting there with me are and if they are willing to do the work. But I think that we need to push as citizens. I can't do this alone. Like, no matter what happens, nobody can do this alone.
Yeah.
And I need people to be like, hey, have you seen this? This is a problem. This is a solution I see. As well as helping me find the things that the commissioners can legally do. I'm not a lawyer.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, another hard shift. I figure we can close this out talking Cuba.
All right.
Which I left for last because I don't know if you have a hard stop here, but God knows that two Cubans with a Venezuelan in the peanut gallery, we could be here all day if we really wanted to, talking about this. I guess I'll start by asking you to tell me about your relationship with Cuba, right? Because not anybody who's grown up Cuban doesn't necessarily come into a sort of like political consciousness of it
right.
at the same time. So describe your relationship with Cuba, whether it's over time or whatever.
It's been over time. I think like many Cuban Americans here, our parents really don't talk about these issues with us so much. At least that was my experience. I don't know if you had a different one. But I found that amongst my Cuban American friends, those that weren't born in Cuba, we didn't ever talk about it. We never really discussed this issue, whatever that issue is. I knew my parents' story. I knew my dad had been a political prisoner. I knew my mom had broken him out of jail. I knew that that was the reason we were here. And it was always something kind of the underline of all of our beliefs. And it wasn't until I started getting reconnected with my family in Cuba, which happened primarily because now they have access to cell phones. You know, I can't travel to Cuba. I refuse to go to Cuba. My father has put the fear of going to Cuba in me since I was a child.
Yeah.
At least until the government falls. Obviously, I have to put that for the benefit of other people that didn't grow up Cuban, that don't realize that that's...
Yeah, we can get into all that. That's fine.
So until the situation changes, I don't intend to go. I started connecting with my family. And it was then that I realized, it really hit me like, wow, this is going on for real. Like, this is really happening. And... you know, now with the July 11th, so that was always just kind of in my mind. What can we do? What can we do from over here? We really can't do much. We're barred from going unless we go on an airplane and, you know, follow the rules. We can't do much. We can't help them. What can we do? After the July 11th protest happened, I became really frustrated with our politicians, specifically the ones in Miami that cater to our community. You know, oh, we're going to get you Wi-Fi. We're going to do something. We're going to lobby the government. As a libertarian, I don't want the government to go and launch a war with Cuba. But could we not like do something else? Could we not send maybe peacekeeping troops? We do have the UN. What are they doing? Not a whole lot. How is it possible that we can send troops around the world, but we can't send troops 90 miles from our shores to keep the peace, to make sure that the government isn't beating up its citizens and killing them? And, you know, we have 45 children in jail at this moment. 45 kids between 15 and 17 years old that have been given jail sentences up to 20 years. Like, what are we doing? If we're American and we're talking about giving democracy in other countries, and that's why we're going to war. Hello? We have children in jail 90 miles from our shores, and we're like, nah, but, you know, they'll solve that problem. So the only thing that I thought I could realistically do was send medicine. And that's what I ended up doing, is sending mostly antibiotics, but pretty much anything that we can into Cuba to help people that need it. And the reason they need it is because their own government won't provide it, and they can't provide it for themselves because they're in a dictatorship. And
this is through People for Cuba, which you founded.
Yes.
Tell me about to the extent that you can, because I know that those things are always, you know, sensitive, but tell me about the mechanisms, that how that functions, to the extent that you can, you know, be
so it's a very small, I haven't incorporated it yet. We've decided to just go ahead and keep working on it. And so we will be eventually, you know, incorporating it and turning it into 501c3. And so that will eventually happen. I'm going to
move this a little bit just so you're kind of like more in front of it. Yeah.
So we will be getting that going. And how it works now, we've gotten so many donations from people for medicine and stuff. I've been very, very blessed with that. And some cash donations as well. What we do is we send it to Cuba, person to person, using the system that everybody uses, which is La Mula, you know. During COVID, that was during the lockdowns from July until November, pretty much. That was really difficult. It involved sending people through Spain, or, you know, it's just been, it can be done. It's just a lot of work. And now they're trying to change the laws in Cuba that if you receive any type of help, you can go to jail. So they want it to go through the government. So it's not getting much better. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop. And we've been delivering these medicines to people in Cuba, and then they distribute it in their neighborhoods. So that way, you know, most people, myself included, I was ignorant to this. I thought like, oh, we're sending a bottle of 100 Tylenol pills. Well, that'll go to one person. Well, no, that doesn't happen in Cuba. They open up that bottle. They make these little paper envelopes, because that's what they have. And they'll put like 5 pills for this family and 5 pills. So that one bottle can help 10 families, 15, you know, whatever it is. And it's beautiful to watch. And I think we need more of that. We need that person to person building of bridges, because in Cuba they've been told so long that the government, the United States government is the one that blocks them from having it, when it's really their own government.
Right.
And those bonds within people, within their communities of helping each other have been broken.
Right.
So to me, that's the important mission here, is to recreate those bonds from Miami to Cuba and within Cubans, so that, maybe, hopefully, we can start having these conversations about bringing more freedom to Cuba without the government.
Is your, and I'm happy to get into, my at least childhood relationship with Cuba was different from yours, because for me, like, it was always a subject, and I even satisfied a lot of my community service hours, and when I was a kid at Directorio Democrático Cubano.
You're a lot younger than I am. I grew up in the time where there weren't that many Cubans.
Not that much younger than you.
Here, I remember reading on the walls, on expressways, the graffiti of Cubans go home.
Sure.
People here hated. So I think that's kind of why my parents were like, shh.
Right. No, and for them that experience was much more too. I think it was just, my dad is also on the younger side. He's one of 10. So his oldest brother is 75 and he just turned 60.
Oh, wow.
But he was always very engaged. So so he was always doing a lot with the Cuban American National Foundation and with the Directorio. And I did a lot of volunteer work with them. And then when I was in college, I became involved in that Raíces de Esperanza group. But anyway, the question I was going to ask you was, is your unwillingness to go to Cuba more of an emotional than a philosophical thing? And I ask because you don't want to go, but you're sending things through people who would travel themselves.
Right. So the reason I don't want to go is because I'm very involved politically.
Oh, this is so... He has a booger. Oh, no.
I don't want to go because of... so originally it was my dad saying,
sure,
we don't want you to go. Also because my father never fulfilled his sentence. Okay. And so he felt that the Cuban government might use that to lure him back of somehow. I don't know if that was just my dad being a little paranoid, or if it was legit. My grandmother, we have family members that, members of my extended family that were fusilado, there's always been that fear of hey, they've killed people before.
Oh, yeah.
Do you really want to go? And then now that I speak a lot about the Venezuelan government, about the Cuban government, now I know for sure I cannot go back. I know I'm on a few lists. Yeah. Let's leave it that way. So I personally can't go. I know from other freedom fighters like Gloria Alvarez, when she made it to Cuba, you even said that you weren't allowed back in. When she made it to Cuba, they followed her around. They gave her an escort, and she couldn't leave unless it was with them. And then she was told, leave and don't come back. Right. So really, what am I gonna accomplish in Cuba that necessitates taking that risk?
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I was there, and you're also in a different position now that you have the 4 kids and you got a whole thing. When I went, I was in college, and I had no interest in going, except for the fact that I had an opportunity presented to me that it was the kind of trip where I felt like I'd be taking more from them than I was leaving behind, and then it was okay. I was the first person in my family to go back, or not to go back. I had never been, but it felt on some level like a going back. And nobody knew except for my parents and friends who were in that organization with me that I had been, until the 4th trip, when I was turned around, because what I didn't want was for the wrong people to find out I was going and then to jeopardize those trips. So it's a miracle that I got in and out 3 times, and then was just the 4th time I went was about a week in advance of the Juanes concert in 2009. Wow. And the idea had been for me to go and deal with independent journalists on their coverage of the concert, among other things. And I guess by then it was actually a crazy little experience. I land in Havana from Cancun, because at the time you needed
you need to go somewhere else and then do the whole don't stamp my passport thing,
right? Because we had you needed a trip specific license to go, but I was traveling on democracy promotion licenses, which is the one that like you don't show up in Havana like, oh, here's my permission, and here's the NGO under whose license I'm traveling to promote democracy in Cuba. So
that might get you killed.
Yeah, so like the joke that I tell all the time is that I would go through Cancun and I would bribe all the passport people so that it looked to the Cubans like I was taking measures to break the law when really I had permission from Treasury. And I would like load my suitcase with condoms and bathing suits as if I was just there to fucking tan. And at college I wasn't doing very much of either of those things, and but that's what it looked like. And then I would basically be running around as an information mule,
right?
And I was like picking up photos or dropping off. And the people I met Joanny Sanchez and her husband Renato, and
that woman is a hero.
These people from Porno. Orlando Luis Pardolazo. I met Harold Cepero, and he really became my only friend in Cuba who died with Oswaldo Paya in that car. I met Antunes and Coco Fariñas, and it was all like this very surreal thing, right? Like I didn't have the experience of going to Cuba and being shocked by the experience because I had been so immersed in it from when I was a little kid, right? Like that was all of my politics was through that lens.
Right.
But then the fourth time that I went was for this concert, and so I go through Cancun, I land in Havana, and I guess at the time, because there was so much security stuff happening, they had decided like they had bigger fish to fry, and they just weren't going to let me in. I'm sure that they were doing a lot of just like being more judicious and efficient with their surveillance stuff. So I hand somebody my passport, and she asked me to go and like wait in the corner. And I go and I wait, and they let everybody else who had just gotten there on my flight go through, and they call me back and they ask me some questions, and they tell me they basically tell me like they're going to send me back on the same flight, on the same plane that had just brought me from Cancun, which was still at the gate, right? Because it's shuttling back and forth between Havana and Cancun, and I'm like, is there a reason at this point? And at this point, like I'm trying to figure out like, okay, how much do I poke? Because I really do want to know what they're going to tell me, but at some point, like I don't want to poke too hard because maybe I'm just stuck here. Right now, they're basically telling me they want to send me back. And what they told me was that there was nobody there who had like the security clearance, pero lo que me sale en pantalla es que a usted no se le puede dejar entrar a ninguna parte del país. We can't let you into any part of this country, which I thought was a very funny way of putting it, right? Like, oh, if you landed in Santiago, maybe you would have gotten in, but no.
Like nowhere.
Yeah, like you are not allowed here, right? Yeah. You are not allowed to be here. And so this is the thing that was crazy to me, right? Like, it's not crazy that they would turn somebody away, but I had landed on a Mexicana Airlines flight. So this is a Mexican airline. And this lady steps out from behind her, passport check thing and just walks me to the gate. She tells me to follow her. And then she walks me through what is the term for the jetway? Uh-huh. Walks me through the thing, tells me to get on the plane and sit down. And I don't ask any questions at this point because they're clearly...
How did you get your luggage?
I don't have a boarding pass. I'm being kicked out of this country that I'm apparently too dangerous to be in, but I'm not handcuffed. There's no air marshal. If this happens in any other country in the world, and they tell you, this guy, we're kicking him out, he can't be here, this is too much of a risk, so we're putting him on this plane with you, I'm like, now I'm getting off the plane.
Right.
If I'm in Paris and somebody's gotten kicked out for being too dangerous a character, and they're just like sitting in the plane next to me, it's like, I'm not going to wait for my pretzels. I'm out of here. I'm, taking it. But I waited until I landed in Cancun to ask the flight attendants and the pilot, like, is there any record of my having been on this flight from Havana to Cancun? Are you even aware that I was put on this plane? And they were acting stupid. They were like, oh, no, I don't know what you're talking about. It's so strange. And that's what it was, right? It's the cost of doing business in Havana. If you're going to fly into and out of Havana, when they put somebody on your plane, you take them. And so that was the last time that I was there was in 2009. And then I was offered...
You got a free ride back?
Right, yeah.
Did you get a refund on your plane ticket? No.
No.
No, that doesn't happen.
Not only that, I had to buy another plane ticket to get to Miami because I didn't have a flight for another 2 weeks.
Right. They didn't get you. They didn't, give you the service all the way through.
I didn't pay for it. The organization that I was, traveling on their license paid for it.
So how do you feel about a commie coming to to Miami.
About a commie coming to Miami. I mean, there's always going to be commies in Miami.
Did you see that new restaurant that was trying to open?
I did, Havana Cafe.
Yeah.
Right?
What do you think's going to happen there? You're going to be long and prosperous? It's going to be another Versailles? Or
I don't know. I don't think it's going to be another Versailles. I think I think that, and I always hesitate, the libertarian in me, right, hesitates to use we. And even to refer to the Cuban American community, because what the hell does that even mean? But
with that said,
I think too many of us have done a bad job of really capturing the energy that flared up around July 11th. Mm-hmm. And I think that people have gotten tired. I think that too many of us have done a bad job of letting people track the progress of the movement and understanding what their contributions have yielded. And I think that at this point, number one, I don't think that this restaurant is the most important thing, but I don't think it's
but it's funny.
But it's funny and it's worth confronting, right? Yeah. But I also think that I think that people are so worn out that the idea of some assholes from New York or whatever with all their stupid murals and they're inspired by Che Guevara and Fidel eating in Mexico City, whatever. It's a shame because you'd like for people to have stayed engaged, but as funny as that particular story is, I
think the free market's going to prevail, and I just don't think that they're going to have a market for this restaurant. I think that no matter how amazing their food may or may not be, who's going to go there?
Well, but what I'm saying is I wonder how long people will remember, because remember the two of us are very engaged with Cuban and political social media. How many millions of Cubans here still haven't heard that story? I'm sure tons.
I mean, it is in the Miami Herald today, so that may change.
Maybe.
That may change.
People have short memories.
They do have short memories, but I can't imagine a whole lot of Cubans showing up and seeing, what is it, the mural of Biggie? Comrade Biggie?
Yeah. No, listen, I get it, but at the same time, if Los Bambán can pack stadiums, these guys can sell tacos.
God, I hope that's not the case. I hope the free market really does come in. Yeah, I'm I don't know. This is Miami.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised.
But get crowds here.
Sure, but I mean, a lot of people maybe don't know their band's, background. But this is blatantly obvious when they have a Comrade Biggie out on the side. I mean, this is a little further. Who knows what the names on the menu are? I bet you it's Che's favorite sandwich. I mean, if I walk into a restaurant, it's Che's favorite sandwich or something, I'd be like, peace out, people. I have to go. So with that said, I hope that isn't the case because with the Bitcoin conference, I think that's a big deal.
Right.
And I don't think that people who aren't Cubans necessarily understand the issue.
Tell me about the Bitcoin conference thing.
Okay. So the Bitcoin conference, as a lot of people know, it's this huge conference. It's probably the largest Bitcoin conference in the world. And last year we had it here in Miami. I think that was a Francis Suarez doing, or, I think he managed to bring them over here from California, which is swell. And then they had this huge conference. Thousands of people came into Miami for it. I mean, it was an overall success.
Yeah.
At that conference, they announced that Bitcoin was going to be a big thing in El Salvador. And then I think it was a week later or a few days later, El Salvador adopted Bitcoin as its currency. Great, fantastic. They legitimized that whole thing by bringing, this issue to that stage. Now they're trying to do the same thing with Cuba and Eric Jose Garcia Cruz, who is an individual who claims to be the CEO of Cuba Pay, which is QVA Pay. And Cuba Pay is a platform where people from presumably here in Miami, the United States, can send Bitcoin as remesas, as remittances to Cubans on the island. And what it does is it converts the Bitcoin. So the Cuban government or the owners of Cuba Pay keep those Bitcoins and instead give a Visa card with MLC, the moneda libremente convertida, the made up Cuban coin.
Yeah, it's a digital coin.
Yeah, exactly. It is a digital coin, whatever, on a card, so that Cubans can buy from government stores. So they're taking this asset.
It's the dual currency everyone was celebrating them doing away with. It's just, they've just moved forward and done it.
And how amazing for the Cuban government. They now get to keep all this Bitcoin. There's only 21 million in the world. So, of course, they're going to try and scramble and get as much of it as they can. And they get to keep it. And it's going to be on our backs, the people who send money to Cuba. So Bitcoin Conference announced just this week just last week, that this gentleman, this man is coming. He has been invited. And so there's many issues with it. First and foremost, as we know, but a lot of people don't know, you can't own a business in Cuba unless you're part of the Cuban government. Eric has confirmed on podcasts and his own show that he's been on that he was part of the Ministry of the Interior, which is the head of the secret police of Cuba. I mean, we can't get any more entrenched in the Cuban government than the head, somebody that worked for the state security. Right.
Because a lot of people might have businesses who just haven't run afoul of the government.
Right.
And are, active members of the party, in quotations, which, some of those people, you can't blame them, right? Like, okay, you got to feed your kids, so you show up at a march and you wave a flag and you pretend you give a shit. But
not this guy.
You have to actually be trying to be
right.
a part
Eric
of the system.
Was a person very involved with this organization for at least 3 years, and this came out of his own mouth.
Yep.
He was somebody. He even states how much he was given in training from these people. Everything from cybersecurity to, all of the things he needed to create this application. Well, so that guy... who also is part of Bitremesas, which is also part of Bache Cubano, which are these stores that have propped up to take online remittances and be able to buy in the Cuban government stores. And these products that Cubans can't get their hands on because it's not in the stores that they can buy. Anybody who does not have family outside of Cuba is basically forced to do without. They can't get coffee. They can't get milk. Well, milk in Cuba is leche en polvo. It's like the stuff that we wouldn't drink here. Right. But so they can't get these things so that they can sell it on these online stores for dollars, for euros, and now for Bitcoin. And it's just, it's a slap in the face to bring it to the Cuban diaspora's headquarters, which is Miami. Like, this is the capital of the Cuban diaspora. And you're going to bring a Cuban communist, a legit communist, onto the stage and legitimize him. Right. And so, I know a lot of people in the community are like, well, they should know this. And I don't think the Bitcoin conference people knew what they were doing necessarily. I just think that they failed to do their due diligence. I do know that they now know. So I'm waiting to see if they're going to rescind his invitation or not. I am hearing, and I don't know if you've heard the same thing, from Cubans that are very upset and think that he should not make it to the stage. So I really, for the sake of the Bitcoin conference, I hope this doesn't turn into a big thing.
Between the options, because of course there's the plan that they have for him, would you prefer that he not make it there or that he end up on a stage in an exchange with somebody who would actually challenge him and call him out at that conference? Whether he would volunteer himself for that is a different question. But
here's the problem I have with him coming here. If I invited any other Cuban, if you invited any other Cuban, if any other Cuban wanted to come here and expose their ideas on a stage, they can't.
Sure.
They can't. They just can't make it out of Cuba. How did this guy get a license or a visa or whatever to make it here? It's because he's part of the Cuban government. So right there, I have an issue with it. I have an issue with somebody being able to make it here above and beyond everybody else. Right. Off the top. Him being challenged on the stage, I mean, sure, that's probably a better solution. I just don't think he should. There's something that comes from being on that Bitcoin stage, and it's legitimacy. Right. I have a problem with that. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I hope he's, like I said, my solution here is they rescind his invitation. Right. I think that would be the best for everyone. That way, Cubans will be happy that he's not making it here. We don't have, this escándalo that I think is going to come because right now it's in its infancy. Most people aren't paying attention within the Cuban community to what's happening in Bitcoin. Yeah. Once it gets out there more, I think it's going to be un arroz con mango.
Sure. I'm willing to bet that these guys are involved in the conference, but if there's anybody listening who's interested in crypto and this conference and Cuba and wants an alternative, I'm going to look at the technology that we have over here. Okay, so this is run by a good friend of mine named Gianni D'Alerta. And
Oh,
Gianni.
that's cool.
So Gianni is a friend of mine from my cigar days. I don't even want to try to get specific because I'm sure that I would mess it up, but I know that he was involved, not necessarily in some capacity in the development of Ethereum, especially like in communication about it.
Oh, wow.
And he's recently started this thing, which my understanding of it is that he's taken on this project to help independent artists in Cuba monetize their work as NFTs.
I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah.
My thing with crypto is I've been working with the Monero people,
Okay.
which is a privacy coin. I'm actually scheduled to be speaking on their stage at the same time as a Bitcoin conference about Monero in Cuba. Because I believe that Bitcoin and other cryptos are the future of all of these countries. You know, we need to get around the Cuban dictatorship. People need to be able to save money. They need to be able to make money outside of the Cuban dictatorship if they're going to survive, thrive, and be able to, you know, change the way they live. So I'm a big proponent of this. And I hate that I'm speaking out against the Bitcoin conference because I am a huge supporter of theirs. I've met David Bailey, the owner of Bitcoin Magazine, before. I know he's all about freedom. So it pains me to be in this position. But I think that a privacy coin is what's needed in Cuba because we cannot allow the Cuban government to know who is being sent what and how they're using it. So that was my, you know, intro into Cuba and this crypto is how do we get people mining Monero in Cuba, which is much easier than Bitcoin because you can do it off of, they now have technology to do it off of cell phones. So the average Cuban can mine, you know,
Right.
that type of thing. So yeah, I hate that this whole thing is happening. I think that there's a huge future of crypto in Cuba. Lots of good things on the horizon.
Yeah.
And with people like that, people that are working,
Yeah.
you know, in this field, did we have a need to bring a Cuban that is from the government onto the stage? Couldn't we have invited, for example, your friend?
And for all I know, he's got some kind of a speaking role at some point in the conference. I'm sure that they'll have some kind of a presence. Or maybe he helped facilitate getting one of the artists to speak. I mean, I don't know much about the conference format. I'm sure there's all kinds of stages.
There's
and
a whole bunch of stages,
stuff
and the
happening,
big
so.
speakers go on the main stage and the stage, and then everybody else kind of, you know. So listen, again, this isn't a war against the Bitcoin conference, but I think that if they insist on bringing him, it may become dicey.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not a good look for a freedom conference because that's what Bitcoin is all about. It's about freedom.
Right. So I've kept you here for a while now. We've been at it, I think, an hour and a half.
Oh, really? Not that fast.
Is there ground we haven't covered that you want to? Maybe you.
That was my ground that we hadn't covered that I threw in there. The
Bitcoin
Bitcoin conference.
conference.
Yeah,
There
I
you
need
go.
Cubans to know.
Yeah, and I mean on that topic, you know, I think I'd like to see the Bitcoin conference not be the one time a year that people really talk about it, right?
Right.
So I'd love to. I don't know what that can mean. Adoption at retail, and you know, or even just smaller events. Like I think that, especially with how big Miami-Dade County is, right? I think there's a lot. In the same way that Bird and 72nd became like a mini little art hub. It's kind of, you know, it's kind of shit, but it's there, right? And now you have a brewery, and you know, in Lincoln's Beard, and there's stuff happening. I think people are hungry for opportunities to engage with the issue, whether it's like, you know, smaller half day, you know, speaking events or seminars and that kind of shit.
Build it up as a small thing. We should totally host a crypto Cuban meetup or something.
There you go. Yeah. Actually, we can talk about some of the other ideas that I have in general, but
I agree. I think that we need to be talking about these issues and not just at the Bitcoin conference where there is no Spanish content really. You know, it's going to be hard for our, plus the tickets are incredibly expensive, especially closer to the event.
Right.
I don't know what they're at now, but last year was like $1,000 when I decided I wanted to go.
I'm sure all this will change with time. I just think right now it's too easy for certain people to continue to treat the subject of cryptocurrencies as this like stupid, you know, laughing stock.
Meanwhile, it's
right,
amazing.
exactly, right, and I think that if more people were engaged with it and had an opportunity to engage with it, they would. And I think that would start to change the way like culturally it's seen. Because I mean, going back, not to go back to Billy Corbin, but he's an example of somebody who, I'm not Francis Suarez's biggest fan, but I think that he catches too much shit for being into the subject of cryptocurrency. People make it seem like it's this, only some stupid postalita would be interested in this topic. But
the side effects of this.
Right.
More people are moving here. They're leaving Silicon Valley and coming here because of the things that Francis Suarez is doing. So again, I'm not his biggest fan.
Right.
However,
That's
want
not
to
the criticism
replicate
that I have. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. I mean, there are worse things. We talked about Carollo. There are worse things than bringing more people and more money and more investment into Miami. I'm not going to criticize him for those things. Yeah. On the contrary, he is the city of Miami. I would like to do those same things, bring in more into Miami-Dade County.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to criticize him for that. That's for sure.
So I want to end on a thing that we do on Pancom Podcast also.
Okay. Thank you for preparing me for that one.
Yeah. We do these two final things are parting recommendations and shameless plugs. So parting recommendations meaning you can recommend anything to the people who are listening to and watching this. It could be something you ate, read, watched, and it doesn't have to be pertinent to any of what we've talked about. You can, as many recommendations as you want. Could be a movie you saw recently, whatever.
You watch a whole lot of TV or movies?
Whatever it might be, a sandwich you had, a podcast that does a better job of serving coffee.
That Venezuelan place this past weekend? What was it called? Nachos? We went to a Venezuela. So I lived in Venezuela as well.
Right.
And so this weekend we went to a food truck called Nachos. Is that it? No, that's not it. It was carne en vara de nacho or something. I don't know. Okay. It was really good and really fun. And they had música llanera, which I normally hate.
Okay.
But under this circumstance, it was just
with
so
the right
much fun.
food.
Yeah, the right food. They had arepa. I don't know. You said a recommendation, so that one was really good. And it ties into my Venezuelan side. I'm very much Cuban, but I also grew up in Venezuela. So. Yeah, it's in Doral, 74th Street. Okay. It's like a food truck, but
got it.
I don't know. I really enjoyed it. And then shameless plug. Just follow me on social media. I'm on everything as at Bueno for Miami.
Bueno for Miami on all the things. Is there a website?
MarthaBueno.com.
MarthaBueno.com. And People for Cuba, is that also through all that stuff?
So, like I said, we were just kind of doing that informally. We're getting there. I actually was just interviewed by Reason Magazine. There's going to be a whole episode coming up in a few weeks. So I really need to get working on that website for People for Cuba. I really need to push through on that one because I intend to keep doing this for the long haul.
Okay, cool. All right. With that, I would say I'll do my shame. You know what? I'll do a recommendation also. I recommended this already on Pancom Podcast. I feel like that's cheating a little bit, but I would recommend the song Blasphemy by Coleman Hughes. You know of Coleman Hughes? He's a columnist. He got big when he wrote for Quillette. He wrote some columns for Quillette, especially about race. He's like a protege of John McWhorter's, who's a Columbia University linguist. And Coleman Hughes now is he's a fellow with I forget what libertarian, conservatarian-ish think tank. But he wrote he has this very even keel persona, very calm. He testified in Congress opposite Ta-Nehisi Coates about reparations, opposing reparations for slavery. And he's the last person you'd think would put out a rap song worth listening to. And Blasphemy is mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing. My recommendation was good. It wasn't mind-blowing.
No, this was, especially given the context of if you saw this guy speaking normally and then you heard this song, you'd be like, this is the same guy? Look at this. This is wild. And it's actually really, really good.
Slavery, slavery, slavery. You dwell on the past, but letting it go, that requires more bravery. And last time I checked, they all in the grave or they in Mauritania. I pass on the check for my lowest fee, Uncle Sam couldn't pay for me. I feel with my heart, but think with my head. Mix up the parts and we all end up dead. Race is a fake idea, put it to bed. Ain't no debate, I said what I said and my name is my name. Coleman.
And then shameless plugs, you can find this podcast and all the other things that we do at dademag.com. You can go to patreon.com/dademag for purposes of giving us all of your money. If you
Not
go
just some of your money.
just all of it, every penny. If you give us enough of your money, we'll send you mugs or coffee, and then we're doing other things. There'll be other perks involved.
Was that the
soon.
issue? I didn't give you enough money. No, I'm kidding.
That's what it is. That's what it is. That's what it is.
Coffee. I didn't
Yeah. We'll do an even trade. I'll send you some whole bean. Actually, if you were at the last Bitcoin conference, you might have had Abuela Mami coffee. They were like they had a table or booths set up where they were giving away coffee. They were brewing coffee and giving away espresso. And they're our partner on that coffee tier. So there are people who are giving us $15, and then we send them coffee every month, whole bean coffee. So you got to be a coffee person with a coffee grinder.
We don't have a coffee grinder.
Well, I can't help you there.
No.
I can get you the coffee. I can't get you a grinder.
I'm sure I can figure that one out.
Anyway, but thank you very much for doing
you.
this. I really appreciate your agreeing to come to some dude's house and talk in his living room with his dog for an hour and a half. This has been great.
Thank you for having me.